the coastal region of northern England. The fog here is not just a part of the weather, but alive. Through the heart of that fog, a horse-drawn carriage was slowly moving forward. Inside the carriage sat the young historian Alistair Gray, tightly clutching a leather bag. Inside the bag were his notebook, old documents, and a yellowed letter. It was this very letter that had drawn him to the unfamiliar place called Ravensbrook. The surroundings were so silent, as if sound itself feared to exist. Far away, the roar of the sea faded, transforming into a cold breeze. The driver suddenly cleared his throat. "Sir, are you sure you want to get off here?" The tremble in his voice clearly betrayed his fear. Alistair looked out the window and saw a broken stone gate by the roadside. On the gate, carved into an iron plate, was written, Ravensbrook, and below it another word, one that had been half erased by the wear of time, but still legible. Graveyard. Deep within Alistair's chest, an unknown voice whispered. This was the place he had to come to. The driver wrung his hands. "No one stays in this place at night, sir. You could have started your work in the morning." Alistair, with a faint smile-like expression, said, "Don't be afraid. I've only come to look at some old records." The driver muttered in a low voice, "This place doesn't exist in the locals' records, sir. That's why we're afraid." In that moment, a gust of cold wind silenced their conversation, as if creating a grave of silence. The carriage came to a stop. As Alistair stepped out, the door seemed to creak as if weeping. The carriage disappeared behind him, swallowed by the thick fog. Now he was alone, standing before the gate. He noticed unfamiliar symbols carved into the old stone wall. A circle with 3 inverted triangles inside it. He reached out to touch it, but pulled his hand back, feeling an inexplicable pressure. The breeze suddenly stopped. A rasping whisper reached his ears, as if someone were speaking from beneath the earth. The sound wasn't entirely clear, but Alistair distinctly heard 2 words. "Welcome back." His eyes widened. "Back? I've never been here before." And at that very moment, the gate began to open on its own. Slowly, very slowly, as if someone were inviting him in. Alistair took a deep breath. He stepped toward the dark graveyard. He felt that the dead had been waiting for his arrival. As Alistair stepped through the gate, the surrounding silence grew denser. The fog coiled around him like a snake, almost swallowing the path. A faint sound arose as his feet crunched on dry leaves, a sound that dared not pierce the darkness of this place. Beside the gate stood a cracked stone plaque. The writing was nearly erased, but still somewhat legible. "Those who disturb the sleep of Ravensbrook shall never dream again. If you disturb the sleep of Ravensbrook's dead, dreams will never come again. Or perhaps the dreams will be more terrifying than death itself." That stifled sound stirred again within Alistair's chest. The ground wasn't trembling, but it felt as though hundreds of fingers were rising from beneath the graves, clawing at the earth. He shook his head to steady his mind. An illusion, the effect of the cold weather. Though he tried to convince himself, fear found a place in his breath. At that moment, the sound of cough. Alistair turned sharply to look. In the distance, a yellow lantern light floated in the fog. From within that light emerged an old man. A long black coat, deep dark circles under his eyes, as if he hadn't slept for ages. The old man stopped and looked at Alistair. There was no fear in his eyes, but a strange shadow of prohibition lingered. "You new here?" the old man said in a very low voice. "Yes, I'm Alistair Gray, a historian. I'm researching this graveyard." The old man raised the lantern. His weathered face became clearly visible. In an ominous, soft tone, he said, "Research sometimes brings death. Do not disturb Ravensbrook's sleep." Alistair asked, "Who are you?" The old man, without answering, looked toward the graves, as if they were listening, watching. After a long pause, he said, "My name is Gravekeeper Morley, the guardian of this place." Alistair tried to speak calmly. "I only want to understand the beginning. Why is this graveyard forbidden?" Morley stared into the darkness, clenching his teeth. "Because they didn't die." Unease flickered in Alistair's eyes. "They?" The old man whispered, as if uttering a forbidden truth. "Those laid to rest here, their hearts were bound by demonic rituals. They didn't accept death. This land is their prison." The fog suddenly thickened, and sounds seemed to sink into the earth. Morley brought the lantern closer and said, "I'm warning you. If you hear any voice after nightfall, do not respond. No matter how it calls, do not look back. If a grave calls out to you, do not answer." Alistair's hands grew cold. Still, he said, "I'm not afraid." The old man gave him a sharp look. Not being afraid means being a fool. As Morley turned to leave, he paused again. Looking into the distant darkness, he said in a low voice, "When you say you've never been here before, the graves tell a different story." Alistair's heart pounded. "What do you mean?" Morley slowly faded into the darkness. Yet his final words lingered in the fog. "Ravensbrook never forgets. It knows you." Alistair Gray. The moment he heard those words, somewhere in the distance, the earth seemed to crack open. And once again that whisper, "Welcome back." Alistair felt he hadn't merely come to this place. He had returned. Even after Morley faded into the darkness, his warning lingered in the air like the fog. Alistair, watching the cold mist of his breath, began to move deeper into the graveyard. On each grave, it seemed not the mark of death, but a history of fear was written. He noticed that many of the graves here were very old, some dating back before the 1600s. But one grave stood out strangely, newer than the others, yet covered in moss and lichen. It seemed as if someone had deliberately forgotten it. Alistair approached and began wiping the dust from the stone to read the inscription. His hands trembled with cold. Slowly, the letters became clear. Alistair Gray. Exactly his own name. Exactly the same spelling. Alistair's chest felt as if it had turned to ice. His lips parted in astonishment. How is this possible? "I am alive." Below, more words were etched. Died October 17th, 1851. He calculated his own birth year. He was born in 1868, meaning the person in this grave died 17 years before his birth. His breathing quickened. Had someone with the same name been buried here? Or did someone know Alistair before? A sudden sound came from beneath the ground. Something was slowly coming closer. Alistair stepped back. A cold breeze stopped near his ear. Within the breeze, a sound so familiar, as if it were his own voice, but distorted like that of the dead. "You abandoned me." Alistair spun around, looking in all directions. There was no one. A moment later, A crack appeared in the gravestone, as if someone inside was pushing against it. The sound of bones scraping brushed past the leaves and burrowed into his ears. A trembling light flickered at the corner of his eye. Was this what Morley had warned about? Not to respond to the call of the night, Alistair clenched his teeth and stepped back. But the stone grave would not stay silent. The voice from beneath the earth grew louder. "Dig me out. I'm awake." Suddenly, Morley came running out of the fog, gasping for breath and shouting, "Get away, now!" His voice was laced with both fear and anger. Alistair was stunned. "Is this my grave?" Morley grabbed him by the shoulder and pulled him away. "This is your memory, not your future." Alistair's throat went dry. "I don't understand." Morley shook his head. "The time for you to understand hasn't come yet. As long as you're alive, this grave will want to destroy you, because you shouldn't be here." In the distance, the ground trembled again. The night seemed to swallow the entire place. Morley said in a low voice, "Cool me. I'll take you to safety." Alistair didn't look back, but he knew that the grave bearing his name would not stop now, because the dead knew him, and their patience was limited. Morley, holding the lantern, led Alistair deeper into the graveyard. Their shadows stretched unnaturally long against the fog, as if others were walking behind them. "Where are we going?" Alistair asked, his voice still trembling. "To the church, the place that stands right above the mouth of hell." There was no mystery in Morley's voice, only a confession. A short distance away, an old church came into view. Its walls stood tall, but the roof was broken. The most terrifying thing, despite the tall bell tower, there was no bell. Alistair stopped in his tracks. "Where is the bell?" Morley's face darkened. The bell used to ring when the sky broke over Ravensbrook. Then the dead rose. We took the bell down and buried it, so they wouldn't wake again. A chill ran through Alistair's entire body. "You mean the sound of the bell wakes them?" "No, Morley Guisperth. The sound of the bell frees them, and their freedom means our death." As they entered the church, the door suddenly closed silently behind them. Morley, as if this were perfectly normal, raised the lantern. Inside, there were no pews. No cross adorned the walls. No trace of holiness. Instead, strange black symbols were drawn on the walls. The same symbols Alistair had seen near the graveyard's gate. A circle with 3 inverted triangles inside. What are these symbols? Alistair reached out to touch one. Morley stopped him with a sharp voice. "Never touch those marks. They are not faith. They are chains. They keep those below bound." Fear and curiosity mingled in Alistair's eyes. "Who is below?" Morley remained silent for a moment. Then he said, "Those who should have been forgotten. Those who denied death." Suddenly, a sound came from beneath the church's floor. A tap, a prod, a scratch, as if someone were trying to break through the wood to rise. Alistair said in a hushed voice, "Is this your imagination or real?" Morley held the lamp. "They are never imagination." His voice grew cold. "This church is a grave. The demonic rituals began here. Blood has seeped into the wood. Screams are embedded in these walls." For a moment, the entire place fell silent, as if the creatures beneath the earth were holding their breath, listening to their conversation. Morley spoke again. "Tonight will be long, Mr. Gray. Your true journey begins now." Alistair shuddered involuntarily. Why me? Why does this place know me? Morley slowly turned to look at him. His eyes held a gaze, as if he knew far more than he revealed. Perhaps because the true timeline we calculated for you is wrong. Alistair's breath nearly stopped. What do you mean? Morley's voice was now heavy as a grave. You don't know your own history, Mr. Gray. You are a child of Ravensbrook. When the dead call their own, the living return here. Outside, the wind began to howl. The church walls trembled, and from beneath the floor, the first crack appeared. Tonight, the dead were reclaiming their lost voices. Say I'm a child of Ravensbrook. Does that mean I was born here? Morley stared at him for a moment. Then, shaking his head slowly, he said, Yes, but you were taken from here, on the very night of your birth. Alistair was stunned. Taken? What? Before an answer could come, a sound rose from beneath the floor. A sharp noise like bones breaking, followed by the slow shifting of crumbling wood under the earth. Morley raised the lantern. There was no fear on his face, but rather the weight of duty. You were born here, during a demonic ritual. Your birth was the key to breaking a curse. It was as if someone had poured cold water over Alistair's head. Why is such a burden placed on me? Morley whispered, Because you can hear the voices of the dead, and they haven't forgotten you. At that very moment, a hand emerged from beneath the floor. Breaking through the gaps in the wooden planks, fingers appeared, pale, shriveled with long, torn nails. Alistair held his breath and stepped back. The fingers began clawing at the floor, as if whatever was trapped inside sensed that Alistair was so close. The ground began to tremble, and a heart-wrenching scream arose, one that was not human. Let me out. Why have you returned? We've been waiting. They lied to us. The words echoed from all directions, as if the entire church was speaking. With the hunger of the dead, Alistair clutched his head, feeling as though the sounds were piercing his bones and entering his mind. Morley grabbed his shoulder firmly. Don't try to listen. Not all voices are true. They want to drag you down with them. Alistair, clenching his teeth, said, If it's so dangerous here, how can you protect me? Morley looked into his eyes, searching for something, like fire in its center. As he pressed the amulet to the floor, the voices inside let out a wail and faded. The hands vanished with a snap, and the cracks slowly sealed shut. Silence returned, but within that silence lurked the vengeance of 1,000 dead. Alistair's knees were shaking. He could only whisper, My whole life has been a lie. Morley placed a hand on his shoulder. In a stern voice, he said, The time to know all truths hasn't come yet. Mr. Gray, tonight, remember just one rule. He paused, looking into the darkness, where the fog was stirring again. The dead know your name. Make sure you don't call out to them. Low. The later the night grows, the hungrier they become. Alistair glanced back at the church. At that very moment, a knocking sound came from the church door. Slowly, even slower, as if someone inside was tracing the door, searching for a way out. Alistair froze. Will they come out? Morley whispered. If that amulet weren't there, they would have lunged at us by now. Fear was taking root in Alistair's chest, but his curiosity was surpassing his fear. Why do I see them? Why do I hear them? Morley looked at him, a trace of sorrow in his eyes. The night you were born, a child's cry was heard by the dead for the first time. That day's ritual was incomplete. So you were taken far away. Alistair looked up at the sky. No mon. Yet a strange light swirled within the fog. Someone deliberately hid me? Yes. Morley's answer was firm. Suddenly, a faint bell sound drifted from the distance. It could be heard if you listened closely, but in reality, there was no bell. Alistair's body tingled. The bell wasn't buried. Morley closed his eyes for a moment. If the bell rings, it means the prison's door has begun to crack. The sound came again, this time a little clearer. Tom! Tom! Morley quickened his pace at once. Gulme, the dead have started to remember. As they walked, Alistair saw a narrow path at the edge of the graveyard, paved with stones. Alistair's voice trembled. You know the name of this path, as if you've walked it many times before. A shadow of avoidance crossed Morley's face. This path, even if I wanted to forget, I cannot. Many nights I've run behind a funeral procession to keep the dead from returning home. A strange, poisonous feeling gripped Alistair's chest. It felt as though the path beneath his feet was sloping downward into the earth, ever so slightly, like an invisible descent. And then, from the darkness in the distance, a voice drifted forward, dry, distorted, but terribly familiar. Alistair, you've returned. At last. Alistair stopped in his tracks. His heartbeat thundered in his ears. It sounded like my voice. Morley said sharply, Don't listen. Keep moving. But Alistair's eyes were fixed. From within the shadows ahead, a tall, black figure was approaching. No face, just a black void. Yet the voice was Alistair's own. You abandoned us. Tonight, we remember you. Come, return to those among us. Alistair began to move forward slowly. Morley's hand grabbed him and pulled him back sharply. Don't fall for the trap of your own voice. Alistair snapped out of it. He turned and saw. The shadow was gone, but its echo lingered in the air. Morley quickened his pace, not looking back, and only said, Tonight, they're only warning you. From tomorrow night, they'll claim you as their own. Alistair took a deep breath. Only one grew denser with fog. Standing beside Ravensbrook's old church, Alistair questioned whether he was doing the right thing. Yet the note left by his grandfather, those fear-filled sentences, pushed him forward like an invisible force. The church door stood half open. The interior was completely dark. The lanterns hanging on the walls were extinguished, as if untouched for years. In the church's backyard, Alistair saw the forbidden section enclosed by a low brick wall. The locals called it the Whispering Ground. The center of all chaos was supposedly here. He carried only a lantern and tools for digging graves. His hands trembled, his sweat had turned cold. As he cast the lantern's light on an old gravestone, his breath caught before he could read further. The name was one of the cursed names from his grandfather's note. Eleanor Emigraves, a person of his own blood. The soil of the grave was still soft. This was supposed to be a grave from 100 years ago. So why was the soil so soft? With each strike of the shovel, the fog seemed to thicken. From beneath the earth, it sounded as if someone's breathing could be heard. A few minutes later, a wooden coffin came into view. It bore no signs of decay, no marks of time. The pounding in Alistair's chest grew louder. Suddenly, from a crack in the coffin's lid, something began to drip, drip, drip. A dark red liquid. Blood. Alistair's hand shook. This is impossible. At that moment, behind him, someone's footsteps stopped. Alistair turned to see Reverend Huxley standing there. In a cold inside the coffin was so forceful that the wood splintered. Blood sprayed in all directions. The lantern's light flickered. Alistair heard, breathing from within, then a whisper. Alistair. This time it wasn't the wind. It was the voice of the dead. The Reverend said slowly, "Run, now." As Alistair stepped back, the coffin's lid flew off. A pale, blood-smeared body dragged itself upright. Its eyes were completely white. Eleanor Graves was dead, yet she stood, and through the gap of her decayed lips. When Eleanor rose from the coffin, Alistair's entire body froze. It was as if he himself had become the soil of the grave, breathless, alive yet bound in the shadow of the dead. Eleanor slowly raised her head. Her neck creaked with a snapping sound as it turned from right to left, as though her bones were still unable to accept the rules of returning to life. Reverend Huxley whispered, "Keep your eyes down. Do not look into her eyes. They can see your soul." Alistair forced his eyes downward, but in the darkness, the sound of Eleanor's nails scraping against the brick pierced his ears. Fear was spreading through every vein in his body. A breeze blew from behind, but the air in Ravensbrook is never warm. This was the breath of the dead. Eleanor's voice was broken, as if her throat hadn't been used in a long time. Reverend Huxley gripped Alistair's hand tightly. "Do not answer. If you speak, she will claim you as her own." Eleanor's legs trembled. Her knees were caked with dirt, and her breath was heavy with the blood of the coffin. Yet she began to move forward, slowly, unnaturally, completely inhumanly. The Reverend pulled a small silver cross from his pocket, but the cross offered Alistair no sense of safety. Because Eleanor was smiling, there was no life in that smile, only hunger. In a sliver of light, Alistair saw a strange mark etched on Eleanor's neck. A circle with an eye pierced by a dagger inside it. This was not a religious symbol. It was an invocation. Eleanor's eyes, once white, slowly turned black. Breath brushed against Alistair's cheek. She tilted her head and whispered in Alistair's ear, "You have heard their call, and so you must begin the reawakening of the calamity." As her finger touched Alistair's forehead, a flash of visions appeared before his eyes. Fire, blood, countless coffins scattered across a graveyard. And at the center stood a man, whose face was his own, but his eyes were white, and in his hand was a blood-stained dagger. Alistair screamed in terror, and Reverend Huxley pulled him away. The door inside the church suddenly opened on its own. An old bell rang faintly, a bell that never rings. There is no daylight left in this town. Ravensbrook is so dense that the surrounding wooden stones seem to breathe. Alistair is trembling slightly, with Reverend Huxley standing beside him, but even his eyes cannot hide their fear. "The night of your birth," Reverend Huxley whispered, "the most sinister ritual in this place was performed. You were not merely born. You are the bearer of that cursed blood. In every generation, one child of this town is born between this land and the dead." Alistair's head is spinning. A curse. Why my family? The Reverend looked at him and said, "Because the Gray lineage was born to resist or control the demonic rituals of Ravensbrook. But this power never brings peace. Your ancestors once tried to complete the ritual. The result, They all died or vanished. Now, you are the bearer of that curse. Terror filled Alistair's eyes. Then, I'm not just a target, I'm a main game. Exactly, the Reverend said. You've been connected since birth. The dead of Ravensbrook know you. When they call, they don't just seek memories, they demand blood. You are the last hope of that lineage, and at the same time, its final curse. Suddenly, a faint hissing sound came from the air. Whispers rose from beneath the ground. Alistair, come back, finish it. Alistair's hands were trembling. But can I do this? The Reverend placed a hand on his shoulder. The power is within you, but history will test you time and again. The Gray lineage is bound to Ravensbrook by birth. If you want to survive, you must endure the pressure. Your blood, your soul, everything is tied to their call. Alistair's breathing grew heavy. It dawned on him that Ravensbrook's history was not just about ghosts and coffins. It was the history of his own blood. It was the story of the curse he must accept. Reverend Huxley whispered in Alistair's ear, "Now you understand. You are this town's last defense. You were born to bridge the curse of your lineage and the dead of Ravensbrook." There was emptiness in Alistair's eyes, but within his chest he felt a strength, as if the fog were breaking apart. If this is my fate, I am ready. From within the fog, the whispers of the dead grew stronger. Their call came, their expectations clear. Alistair understood. Ravensbrook, the night is deep. The fog has completely enveloped Ravensbrook's graveyard. The smell of earth, rotting leaves, and damp air. Together, they create a strange restlessness in Alistair's heart. He now has only one task: to accept the responsibility of his cursed lineage and complete the ritual. Reverend Huxley said softly, "Here, all the dead of Ravensbrook are waiting. Not only them, but they want this ritual to be completed. Your blood alone can bring them peace." Alistair held the lantern's light in his hand. In the mountain-like darkness, the shadows of coffins in the distance seemed to come alive. Whispers rose from beneath the ground. "Alistair, we know you. Your blood will grant us freedom." The Reverend created a circle beside a coffin. Strange symbols were carved around the circle. This is the ritual, the ancient power of Ravensbrook. You will stand within this circle. You will activate it with your blood. But beware, one mistake, one drop of blood spilled wrongly, and all is lost. Alistair took a deep breath. It wasn't just his hand trembling. A power was awakening within him, one he had never felt before. Hands began to emerge from beneath the ground. The whispers grew louder. "Ravensbrook, Ravensbrook, our right." Alistair slowly raised his hand to his chest and said, "I accept this curse. I will protect my lineage." He let a drop of blood fall into the circle. In that moment, the shadows of the dead began to swirl around. The sound of breathing, the creaking of coffin wood, the whispers, all merged into one. Suddenly, Eleanor Graves stood up, her eyes black. Her smile sent shivers through Alistair's heart. But with the touch of Alistair's blood, the circle grew stronger. Eleanor's shadow slowly retreated. The Reverend came to Alistair's side and said softly, "Do you see? The power of your lineage lies solely within you. The dead of Ravensbrook listen only to the voice bound to the blood of your lineage.